Okay, the sun in the 12th house. We want to understand it. So let's take 2 seconds and understand what the 12th house symbolizes and what the sun symbolizes. Then we can put them together and we can talk about the sun in the 12th house and look at some charts of actual people who have the sun in the 12th house. Angelina Jolie, Frida Kahlo, O.J. Simpson, and Joe Biden. So this is what the 12th house physically is. It's the area of the sky that's directly above the eastern horizon. The area that's just above the land is the area that has the weather in it, the wind, the rain, the clouds, etc. So the houses that are above the horizon directly symbolize things that erode the symbolism of the house beneath it. So the 12th house, the foundation of everything that it symbolizes, is that it erodes or subtracts from, detracts from anything that the first house symbolizes. What does the first house symbolize? Well, it's the sunrise. Right? So it symbolizes things that are visible and symbolizes things coming into being or being born. And therefore it symbolizes the thing which has come into being, the person whose chart it is. So it symbolizes the self. So the first house symbolizes visibility, birth, and self, and therefore the 12th house erodes or detracts from those three things. Now you understand the anatomy and the biology of the 12th house. You can derive a lot of very specific things about the 12th house now, very reliably and confidently. For example, the 12th is the house of unreal things because it's erosive of visibility. So that's why the 12th house has to do with things that are amorphous, things that are abstract, difficult to hold, difficult to grasp. It has to do with things that are fantastic, it has to do with fantasies and dreams, and it has to do with spiritual things, things that are not bound by physicality or limits. This is also why it is the house of unknown things. It's erosive of visibility, so it represents things that you don't see. So it represents things that you don't know. That's why it has to do with things that are far away, things that are alien, from another world, from another country, from another culture, things that are exotic. And then, because the sunrise represents the birth, and the area of sky above the east will erode the concept of the symbolism of birth. So it's not exactly that the 12th house symbolizes death, but it symbolizes the subtraction of what we gain from birth. So it's like draining. It's the house of drain. It's the house of aging. It's the house of becoming tired and fatigued, losing energy and heading towards your expiration. This is also why it is the house of spending money. Because in general, it's about being drained of things, losing things, having things become evaporated from you. Finally, the eastern horizon represents the self, so the 12th house represents things that are erosive of the self. That's why it's the house of humility. Subtracting yourself. Getting out of the way. Getting out of the spotlight. So it's a house which is very isolated. It has a lot of solitude to it, has a lot of quiet to it. And on the flip side, this is the house of enemies because it's antithetical to self. So the people who are antithetical to you are your enemies. But it's not like enemies that are barbarically attacking you. It's more like the enemies who are the naysayers, the detractors, the critics, the people that are depressive and discourage you. That is what you need to know about the 12th house before you can understand the sun in the 12th house. Now the only thing that remains is to just quickly get a review about what the sun represents. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the sun is the brightest planet. So the sun symbolizes the soul, which symbolizes awareness, which is symbolized by light. Light enables vision and visibility, and that's what the sun is all about. That's why it is the planet of fame or public renown. Because it's the planet of visibility. So it has to do with how well known you become, And it also has to do with how much you make yourself visible, how extroversive you are, and also how masculine you are. Also, since the sun represents light, it represents vision. Vision means you know which way to go and you direct other people to go in a certain direction. So the sun's nature is to symbolize people who give commands, who give directions, who give orders, who are the authority figures. That's why it represents people like your dad and the boss and the king, etc. Now let's go back to the basic thing that the sun signifies: awareness. Awareness is the nucleus around which we assemble the electrons of the specifics of our identity. So the sun signifies the specifics of your identity. That's why it's the planet of self, and has to do with your ego and your self-esteem. And this is why the planet has to do with centrality, or the nucleus of things, the center of things, the anchor points of things, the centrality, the stability, the reliability of things. Finally, the soul, or the awareness, is the animator of a life form. And so the sun represents the animation and the vitality that together constitute health, good health. So now indeed we understand both the sun and the 12th house. Now, how should we figure out what the sun represents when it's in the 12th house? All you need to do really is put the two things side by side and think about where they're talking about the same thing. For example, the sun is definitely talking about being bright, which means being visible. Whereas the 12th house is erosive of visibility. So they're talking about the same thing. The sun is talking about visibility and the 12th house is talking about visibility, but they're talking about it in opposite ways. The sun is pro-visibility and the 12th house is anti-visibility. So there we've identified an important thing about the sun in the 12th house that needs to be a key part of our interpretation of it. Another thing is that the sun signifies your identity and your ego and your self-confidence, but the 12th house is erosive of all those things. It's erosive of self, and it symbolizes humility. So again, they're both talking about the same thing, self, but the sun is talking pro-self and the 12th house is talking anti-self. So we're going to have to interpret that clash between the symbolism. And thirdly and finally, the sun represents health, right? Vitality, but the 12th house represents fatigue. So they're both talking about the same thing, your energy levels, but the sun is increasing your energy level and the 12th house is decreasing it. So we have three important clashes between the sun and the 12th house. Pro-visibility versus anti-visibility, ego versus humility, and vitality versus fatigue. Now that we've filtered out these three key things about the sun and the 12th house, we can use our imagination, really, to figure out some specific words that would describe the effects of these three things. For example, how would you describe the effect of a clash between pro-visibility versus anti-visibility? Well, why don't we say difficulty becoming recognized, because the visibility is clashing with the invisibility. So maybe it's a real struggle to get any visibility, and conversely, maybe it's a real struggle to get any privacy. But most likely the planet is becoming frustrated by the resources that are available in the house. So most likely it's difficulty becoming recognized. So unrecognizability, no fame, no recognition. How would you come up with some words to describe the effects of the clash between ego and humility? Well, something along the lines of problems with self-esteem, self-doubt. Another thing that comes to mind is the humble being might be clashing with the authority figure, the ego being. The ego being, the authority figure, might be clashing with the humble being. So another way to put this into words as a concrete statement about the sun in the 12th house is that this person doesn't go well with the boss. Probably the boss is abusive towards them. The authority figures may mistreat them or exploit them. and or they just very distrustful of such figures. Thirdly and finally, how would you give words to express this clash between vitality and fatigue? There's a problem with vitality. The planet of vitality is getting frustrated in the house of fatigue. So the source of vitality is diminished. So what does that look like? Kind of weak. Kind of easily gets ill or persistently ill. Feels lazy, feels lethargic, doesn't feel enthusiastic or even ambitious about things. So this is not a bright picture, is it? Sun in the 12th house. And I'm sure most of the people that come to watch the Sun in the 12th house video probably have the Sun in the 12th house and probably right now are wishing you didn't come to see the video. So unsubscribe and click the unlike button. But wait, let's be realistic about this. We have 4 charts that we're about to examine of people who are famous and successful with the Sun in the 12th house. So either this interpretation is totally wrong, or the system of astrology is slightly more sophisticated than only tunnel visioning on one thing in your chart. So let's ask ourselves the question. This guy Vic, who's making this video, he found 4 famous people who have the Sun in the 12th house. How did he manage to do that if the interpretation of the Sun in the 12th house is so negative? Somehow or another, the other things in the chart that can also indicate fame and confidence and health and energy and ambition must be stronger than the Sun in the 12th house. And that Sun in the 12th house also must not be too terribly situated there. It must be there in a pretty good condition. Now let's actually look at these charts and see if that is not indeed what we find. So like I said at the beginning, we've got Angelina Jolie, Frida Kahlo, O.J. Simpson, and Joseph Biden, President Biden. So we think that something in these charts must be offsetting the lack of recognition indicated by the Sun in the 12th house. What could do that? The strongest thing that could do that would be the 1st house and the 10th house. So what we're most likely going to find in these charts is that they have a fantastic 1st and 10th house. And hence the Sun in the 12th house cannot manifest its potential for decreasing the fame. Though, of course, it has an effect upon their character, which you can see by thinking about these 4 people on the list. So let's specifically look at Angelina's chart first. What does she have going on? Well, she says she has a 1st Lord in Raja Yoga with the 10th Lord in the 9th house. Whoa. Let's check and see if she's right. So her 1st house is Cancer. That means her 1st Lord is the Moon. Ooh, the 1st Lord is in the 10th house. That's contradicting the interpretation of the Sun in the 12th. Because the 1st Lord in the 10th house means a person who makes themselves very visible and is very recognizable. It's her 1st Lord in the 10th house, and whose company is it in? Well, on one side it has Jupiter, and on the other side it has Mars. Which Lord is Mars? Mars is the 10th Lord and the 5th Lord. So what happened is the 1st Lord, the Lord of a trine, joined with the 10th Lord, the Lord of a quadrant, in the quadrant. That's a very, very strong Raja Yoga, especially because the Lord of the 10th house is also the Lord of a trine. And the Lord of the 1st house is also the Lord of the quadrant, so it's a double Raja Yoga in a quadrant. So she has fabulous Raj Yoga between her 1st Lord Moon and her 10th and 5th Lord Mars in her 10th house. Also, that same 1st Lord is with Jupiter, who's the 9th Lord. And that's another Raj Yoga. She has something else to say too. She says that her 10th Lord is in another Raj Yoga because it's in a mutual aspect with Saturn. So that means that the Lord of a trine, the 5th house, Mars, is in a mutual relationship with the Lord of a quadrant, the 7th Lord, Saturn. And that Raj Yoga is where are the planets forming that Raj Yoga? In the 1st house and the 10th house. She also says that, I do kind of relate to this interpretation because I do kind of clash with authority figures, especially growing up. And sure enough, her second lord is the sun, right? The sun is the second lord. The sun in the 12th house didn't really get a chance to manifest its potential to diminish her fame, but it does manifest some of its potential to diminish her self-worth via lack of support from the family. Finally, the last thing that she wants to say about her chart here is that her 12th lord is domicile after all. Her 12th lord is in the 12th house. So that means the 12th house itself isn't in an undignified condition. It's in a dignified condition, and when things are in dignified conditions, they don't display bad versions of their traits. So to sum up Angelina's chart, sun is in the 12th house, but the 12th house is dignified. And she's got 91 million Raj Yogas going on. So there's no way that the sun in the 12th house is going to actually have an effect of making her unknown. She's going to be quite known, but she's going to have a history of in her formative years having some self-doubt and low self-esteem. The second chart here, Frida Kahlo, the great painter. What's going on in her chart? What does she have to say about her chart? She says, I also have a first lord in Raj Yoga, and it's with the fifth lord. And guess what? My fifth lord is exalted. So look, let's see if she's right. Her first house is Leo. That means that her first lord is the sun, because the sun owns Leo. And look, find the sun on this chart. It's up there in Cancer in the 12th house, like we said. And who's it with? It's with Jupiter. And what houses does Jupiter own? Jupiter owns the 5th. So there you go. You have the same thing. The lord of the first house, which is a quadrant, combines with the lord of the 5th house, which is a trine. And when you combine the lord of a quadrant and a trine, you get something very good called a Raj Yoga, which makes you very renowned and knowable, famous, recognizable. And it's with her 5th lord, who's exalted. So it's likely going to have to do with 5th housey things that she becomes known for, which is creativity, expression. Additionally, her 5th lord, she says, is in another Raj Yoga. It's in a Raj Yoga with the 4th and 9th lord, Mars, who is also exalted. So her exalted 5th lord, Jupiter, is in a mutual aspect with her exalted 4th lord, Mars. So that 5th house is really wonderful, and gets what's right next to that. She also wants us to note that her 10th house is pretty good too. Because not only is the 10th lord in the 11th, which is good for an artist, but also her 10th house has an exalted planet. That exalted planet is the moon, which is extremely creative and artistic, and also that moon is the lord of Cancer, and Cancer is the 12th house. So just like Angelina, her 12th house is dignified by virtue of the lord having a high dignity. Hence, even without these Raj Yogas, the sun in a dignified 12th house is not going to give a very painful version of its baseline theoretical interpretation. There's 3 exalted planets in one chart. So she's got exalted moon, exalted Mars, and exalted Jupiter. So it's pretty hard to bring down a chart. There's 3 exalted planets in it. Now, how about Mr. O.J. Simpson? Let's see, what does he have to say about his own chart? He says, yo, I also have the first lord in Raj Yoga with my 10th lord. So don't think I'm not famous. The sun in the 12th house is actually the first lord in a Raj Yoga. So how can anybody in their right mind confidently say that the sun in his 12th house represents insignificance, even though theoretically the sun in the 12th house represents insignificance? But what I want to tell O.J. Simpson is, unfortunately for you, that's about it, buddy. That's all you really got there in this chart. There's a couple of things that indicate that you are a good fighter and you like to compete and so forth. So you're a good athlete and so on. You're strong and all that. There's a lot of that in your chart, but nothing else really showing you to be a great person. And hence, if you think about O.J. Simpson, he really kind of is a good example of the clash between pro-visibility from the sun and anti-visibility from the 12th house, in the sense of here's a person who became very famous and then very infamous. And now finally, having a look at Joe Biden, he says, I got something better than a Raj Yoga. My first Lord is exalted, and my first Lord's Lord is exalted. That's a very good yoga. So Jupiter is his first Lord. Where's Jupiter? Oh no, it's in the 8th house. Yeah, and it's exalted in the 8th house. In this other kind of yoga called Adi Yoga, which makes a person very strong and dominant. And so if Jupiter is exalted, it means it's in Cancer. And so Cancer belongs to the moon. And where's the moon? The moon is over there in Taurus. Taurus makes the moon exalted. So indeed, here's a person with the sun in the 12th house. So you think he has a problem with self-esteem, let's say. And also a problem with visibility. Nobody knows this person. But his first house is just doing great. Because his first Lord is exalted, and even the Lord of the first Lord is exalted. So how likely is it that he has problems with self-esteem? If you probably look at his life and you know he's a stutterer and he has self-doubt, etc. It's not that it just goes away and disappears. The sun is still in his 12th house, but it doesn't dominate over these other things that are even more important. He also tells us that he's also got Raj Yogas to boot. So he's got his 10th Lord. In Raj Yoga, just in case you're thinking, well, it's only his first Lord, so maybe he should be pretty healthy and pretty self-confident, but maybe not very well known. Good. Now you're thinking, because you want the 10th house to really give the well-knownness. Well, his 10th Lord is in a Raj Yoga with the 9th Lord and the 5th Lord. So his 10th house is Virgo. Virgo belongs to Mercury. His Mercury is right there, right next to his sun in the 12th house. And the sun is the Lord of what house? If Sagittarius rises, sun owns Leo. Leo is the 9th sign from Sagittarius. So the sun is the 9th Lord if Sagittarius rises. Moreover, look on the other side of Mercury. On the other side of Mercury is Mars. It's the 5th Lord. So his 10th Lord, the Lord of the quadrant, is conjoined to Mars, the Lord of the trine, and the sun, a Lord of the other trine. So again, you have a mega Raj Yoga for the 10th Lord. So his first house is doing great, and his 10th house is doing great, and his 12th house is doing great, which is important because the dignity of the 12th house is important for interpreting any planet that's in the 12th house. Why is his 12th house doing great? Because the 12th Lord is in it. Whenever the Lord occupies the house, that's domicile, and that makes the house dignified. If you want to actually have my interpretations for all of your placements in your chart, you can go to my website and order that from the charts page. It's victorcara.com/R2. Thank you so much.